The P.
Really bothering Mikey Garcia because he's putting up that left hand, trying to block it, but he can't block it. When he's trying to block it, you know, Earl Spencer's coming in with that left.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, this weekend, a fight that may have flown largely under the radar given its location, far out there on the shores of Greece. A new WBO super lightweight champion was crowned, and that champion goes by the name of Cristina Linardatou, who hails from Greece by way of the Dominican Republic. And she squared off against what was the undefeated young up-and-comer Candy Wyatt, who had a professional record of 8-0. You know, this was an undefeated fighter. They fought for what was the vacant WBO super lightweight title, and Cristina managed to score a 6th-round TKO stoppage, dropping Candy Wyatt 3 times en route to that stoppage. And this is the 4th undefeated fighter that Cristina Linardatou has bested in her 12 professional contests. She dished out the first loss to Sam S.J. Smith, Lila Direshvili, highly touted young up-and-comer Alicia Baumgartner in what was a very close fight, and more recently,
Canadian super lightweight
Candy Wyatt for what was the vacant WBO super lightweight title. So Cristina Linardatou and her resume is definitely coming along. I mean, this is a girl who's only really got 12 professional fights. She's got a pro record of 11 wins with 1 loss. That loss being to none other than WBC lightweight champion Delphine Persoon. Sidebar: the fact that Cristina now stands as a champion only strengthens Delphine Persoon's resume for having been the first one to beat her. This is a testament to just how accomplished and how experienced Delphine Persoon is as a WBC lightweight champion. Back to Cristina, the newly crowned WBO super lightweight champion. Do realize something. Super lightweight is fast becoming a very hot division, a division that is quickly taking shape. Understand that while Cristina might hold the WBO title, Chicagoan Jessica McCaskill holds the WBC title. Experienced veteran Anaí Esther Sanchez holds the WBA title. And former IBF lightweight champion Victoria Bustos holds the IBF version of the super lightweight crown. So the titles are split 4 ways between 4 girls.
4 champions.
And the question then becomes, who is the best among them? Because short of a contest between the champions, it's very hard to tell. On one end, Anaí and Victoria have a bit more experience than Jessica and Cristina. But on the other end, you know, you conduct a little eye test, and it does appear that as far as who the most dangerous of all 4 of those champions are, it really is a tie between Jessica and Cristina. You get a gander at Cristina, and let me tell you something. Any contender climbing those super lightweight ranks via the WBO, looking for a title shot, whoever they may be, they're in for a long night. That applies to the other champions in the weight class too. Whoever's looking to take that WBO title from Cristina Linardatou is in for a long night, because this is a very capable fighter. She's got the look of being somewhere between a boxer-puncher and a pressure fighter, but pressure in particular definitely seems to be a part of her overall implementation. The way she walks down an opponent, stalks them, comes in at a slight crouch just before firing either a looping right, a straight, or a hook. I'll tell you that it's very semblant to what we used to see from fighters like Mike Tyson, fighters like Joe Frazier, coming in at a slight crouch, constantly moving side to side as not to get peppered with shots coming through the front door. It's very semblant from what you used to see from those kinds of fighters. That's more or less what you get with Cristina Linardatou, a fighter that angles their head away from the shots as they're moving forward, angling their torso away from the shots as they're moving forward, coming in behind their jab to get within proximity to land compact, short, sharp hooks. A fighter that's looking to land power shots, that this is not a chess player per se, this is not a sharpshooter, this is more along the lines of a Gatling gun kind of fighter, firing overhand rights, looping rights, straights, always looking to land power shots, a fighter that throws with bad intentions. And this isn't what you see in the IBF champion Victoria Bustos, for example, or the WBA champion Anaí Este Sanchez.
Nowhere near as aggressive.
It's for this reason that, for me, at least for me, the most dangerous fighters, the most dangerous champions, I should say, in the super lightweight division would have to be Christina and Jessica, because they've got that in common. They're two fighters that got, they got a lot of moxie. They don't come in there for a finesse fight. They come in there to hurt you. They both have that in common. So the question then becomes, when you got this many champions in one weight class, when the world titles are split 4 ways between 4 different fighters, which one among them is the best, and who's going to be the first to take that step forward and call out these other champions to assert themselves as the best in show? In layman's terms, at what point can we expect unifications in the super lightweight division? Because there's no shortage of talent there, and there's no shortage of sizzling fights that can and should be made. At what point can we expect a Victoria Bustos versus McCaskill, or a McCaskill versus Linardatou, or an Anaí Este Sanchez versus any one of the other 3 champions in the weight class? At what point do we start looking out for those fights? Because I'll tell you something, Cristina Linardatou has made a statement this weekend, and her professional record is really coming along. So congratulations to her, and I look forward to seeing more of the newly crowned WBO super lightweight champion. In other news, newly crowned WBC super middleweight champion Anthony Direll has been ordered to defend that title against the once champion in recess, former WBC champion David Benavides. The WBC's ordered that fight, and that's not all, folks. Whoever wins that fight has to then defend the title against Avni Yildirim, who was in opposition of the decision that saw him losing that fight to Direll. They contested, they protested the judges' scoring in that fight. They wanted an immediate rematch. Well, they couldn't get an immediate rematch, but they got the next best thing. They get the winner of Benavides versus Direll. Now, this is something that doesn't take me by surprise at all. I figured that this was how this was going to break down. There were some talks, some harsh words between the newly crowned IBF super middleweight champion Caleb Plant and David Benavides. David Benavides had some things to say, but in spite of the talk, I figured that before it even comes to that, before it comes to Benavides versus Plant, what we're likely to see is Benavides versus the winner of Yildirim versus Direll, and then once David gets his title back, which I think he will, by the way, once David gets his title back, then maybe we'll be a bit closer to a fight between him and Caleb Plant. Now, I have no doubts that David Benavides has everything he needs to run right through Anthony Direll. And anybody who's been keeping up with David Benavides fight by fight, anybody who just so happened to see his last fight against Jalen Love, where he scored a second-round knockout of Jalen Love, anybody that knows anything about David Benavides and Anthony Direll would likely pick David to win that fight. So I have no doubts that as long as that fight gets made, as long as it comes off, it's highly probable that David Benavides runs right through Anthony Direll and on to the next one. The next one presumably being Avni Yildirim. And provided that Avni Yildirim can stay in the winner's circle, stay in the winner's bracket, so that he can benefit from that mandate, I don't give him any... I don't think his odds are any better than Anthony Direll's against David Benavides. I think those are two guys that David should be able to dispatch relatively easily, which would put a Caleb Plant unification fight, for example, which would put a fight like that 2 to 3 fights away from now. I mean, this is what I anticipated in my previous video, and I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. That even though David Benavides is exhibiting enthusiasm at the prospect of facing Caleb Plant, who's now the IBF champion, we're not close to that fight. That's a fight that is at minimum 2 to 3 fights away from now. I wouldn't mind if David won his belt, if he won his belt back and immediately proceeded into a unification situation. But I don't see that happening. What I think is likelier than not is David, he runs through Direll, and if Avni Yildirim is still floating around, he'll run right through him too, or someone else. But I don't view a unification fight as something we're likely to see in the immediate future. Maybe 2 to 3 fights from now. Now, I'll tell you that it's not the most sizzling fight. whether it's Benavides versus Direll or Benavides versus Yildirim, those are not sizzling fights. Those are not intriguing fights. It very much seems like a foregone conclusion that those are two fights that David can easily win. But for those guys out there who like to see opponents get overmatched, for those guys out there who like to really see a guy get his fucking ass kicked, whether he's prepared for the fight or not, then yeah, you might enjoy those fights. But I myself don't feel that those two fights, either of them, I don't feel a sense of intrigue in those fights. For me, those fights feel like formalities, necessary evils, if you will. But they're not intriguing fights. I don't feel that either Anthony Direll or Avni Yildirim brings anything to the table for David Benavides. I don't think those guys can contend with his size, his punching power, his aggression, or his boxing. David Benavides might not get talked about as much as some other guys that are out there. Generally speaking, the super middleweight division doesn't get talked about as much as the welterweight division, the middleweight division, or even the junior middleweight division to a lesser extent. It's not a division that gets talked about a whole lot, but David Benavides is a diamond in the rough. In spite of fucking up and sniffing some coke, this is a guy who's very entertaining to watch, and he is a very capable fighter in spite of how young he is, because this is a young guy. David Benavides ain't but 22 years old. So you think about what he's already put forth, and he's only 22 years old. He's already been a world champion. He's still undefeated. His O is still intact. He's very close to becoming a world champion once again, and he's already a skilled fighter. He's already one of the elites at only 22 years old. Then you get in your time machine, you fast forward as far as what the possibilities are for someone who's this young and has already exhibited so much. The possibilities are endless. Time is very much on David Benavides' side. And it just so happens that it's not just time that's on his side, it's also size. David Benavides is one of the bigger super middleweight guys that are out there, you understand. This is a guy who could easily, somewhere down the line, start campaigning as a light heavyweight. You know, anybody looking for a problem with this fucking kid, they may be in a world of hurt, because he's got punching power, he's got boxing acumen, and one of the best goddamn shoe shines, if not the best shoe shine, in the whole weight class. This is a guy that you really do not want hitting you, okay? David Benavides has a lot of possibilities as a fighter. So, you know, while these may be formalities, this heralds what could be a very hot super middleweight division. This heralds what could be some interesting fights somewhere down the line. Maybe not in the immediate future, maybe not in the near future, but things are heating up, provided that one, Caleb Plant can stay in the winner's bracket and adequately defend his IBF title so that one day he may be able to unify it with David Benavides' WBC title, which, like I said, I have no doubts he's gonna run through Anthony Direll the same way he just ran through Jalen Love. And if Avni Yildirim is still standing there, then he's gonna get ran through too. Those are my thoughts. That once David Benavides is done going through the merry-go-round, once he's done going through the carousel of PBC showcase fights, we may actually get to see him fight Caleb Plant. In other WBC-related news, apparently, Mikey Garcia is set to be speaking with the sanctioning body this week, it being that he's still the WBC's 135-pound champion, and he has been as far back as January 2017, when he defeated undefeated Dejan Slatijanin, for that belt. The issue is that since that time, he hasn't satisfied a single mandatory challenger for the WBC, and he's got one outstanding. 2012 Olympic gold medalist Luke Campbell. They ordered that fight last year, you understand. Now, whether or not you condone what Mikey Garcia's been doing in his last few fights is really up to you. That just boils down to preference. I myself had no complaints, because even though he was weight jumping, he was weight jumping in title fights. He jumped up there and fought Sergey Lipinets for the IBF 140-pound title, then jumped back down to 135 for a unification fight against another undefeated champion. So I didn't complain about those things, and I don't see precedents to complain about them now. The thing is, though, okay, those things have happened already. You've gotten those fights out of the way. You're coming off a loss to Errol Spence at 147 pounds, which is negligible because you've never fought anyone there. So it's nothing to be ashamed of at the end of the day. But now, you're still a champion. You're still the WBC's 135-pound champion, and you've got a guy who's worked his way to a title shot, that guy being Luke Campbell. So what do you intend to do? Are you going to defend that title, or are you going to do the right thing and vacate it instead of sitting on your hands waiting to make a decision? I'll tell you that, look, the WBC, Mauricio Suleiman, he was quoted as saying that there is no set time for him to make a decision, and I don't like the sound of that. The title ideally should be kept in circulation, but it being that the WBC has this reputation for doing a guy a favor, we might see a situation similar to what we saw at light heavyweight with Adonis Stevenson, where this guy's been having his pick of the litter for the last couple of years, hasn't satisfied a mandatory challenger yet, and that deprives the fans of, more interesting fights, and it doesn't keep the belt in circulation as much as it should be. We might see a situation like that right down there at 135. That's basically saying that they're not going to apply pressure on Mikey Garcia, or at minimum, it appears like they're not going to apply pressure on Mikey Garcia, because Mauricio Suleiman said there's no set time for him to make a decision. And that's a very odd thing to say when you've already ordered this fight between him and Luke Campbell last year. What do you mean there's no set time? If it were the IBF, you know with an absolute certitude that they would have hit the gas on that for Mikey to make up his mind, make a decision. Do you still want to hold our belt in this weight class? Because these ranks have got to move along, and this belt has got to be kept in circulation. If it were them, you know they would have hit the gas on that. But it's the WBC, and they are willing to let Mikey sit on his hands. I mean, they're more than willing. They've done it before with other champions, and this would be another chapter in the same book. That as long as Mikey wants to hold their belt, they're gonna let him. Why? Why is it always, why is it, any other time? What's the reason? Sanctioning fees. They probably view Mikey Garcia as being a more lucrative champion that can bring them bigger sanctioning fees than if they took that belt from him and gave it to Luke Campbell. Those things in mind, of course they'd be willing to let Mikey hold on to that title for as long as he is willing to hold it. Now, that doesn't mean that Mikey's going to go back to 135. Ultimately, we don't know. But what that does mean is that as long as he feels like taking his time to make up his mind, they're going to let him hang on to it. He might say, you know what, I don't want this belt anymore, I'm going to go to 140. He might say something like that. Or he might say, you know what, I want to pick up a baby belt at 147 pounds. He might say something like that. We don't know what he's going to say. But what we do know, or at least what it appears like, is they're going to let him hang on to it for as long as he feels like to make up his mind. Now, for Luke Campbell, it's a fucked up situation because that leaves his title shot in the air. But we've seen this many, many times before. I mean, how many times have we seen the WBC shortchange one guy to accommodate another? You see what they did with Dillian White. You see what they did with Jamal Charlo. And now you're seeing what they may do with Luke Campbell. That in order to let Mikey hang on to that belt, they will leave Luke's title shot in limbo and probably have him fighting in baby belt fights. And while this kind of preferential treatment is viewed as being unethical, especially on the part of a sanctioning body, while it's unethical, the WBC has become so synonymous with it that people aren't even surprised anymore.